My name is Joy Livengood, and my job is I work for Macmillan Health right now, and so we do health education, but a huge part of that is doing social emotional classes. And so one of the things that we do is suicide prevention. It's something that's very near and dear to my heart, and something I feel very passionately about, and something I feel very honored to have the opportunity to present to people. And I'm glad that people are concerned about these things and thinking about these things and wanting to know how to minister to their kids and protect their kids, because this is a hard topic and one that people typically shy away from and avoid. And so I felt very honored to be invited to be here. So we're going to talk today about suicide awareness and how to prevent suicide. Hopefully give you guys some really good tools to put into practice with your own ministry, with your own families. I am going to be teaching using the QPR method. So I am a trained QPR trainer. I am not doing this as an official training, so the content I alter just a little bit, but as far as the steps, the method for preventing suicide, that's how we're going to remember all of those steps today. Oh, I forgot to turn it back on. Silly me. There we go. Helpful. Just the disclaimer, I always want to start with the reminder that we, even as people in ministry, we're not mental health counselors. That's not our area of expertise. And it becomes very easy as a parent, as a person in ministry, to take on all the responsibility in when there's a suicidal crisis, to say, well, I have to do everything and be this person's savior, so to speak. And it ends up causing a lot of harm to the person who's trying to help. So just keeping in mind that we have limitations, and there is limitations to what we can do as a lay person, so to speak. So this just gives us an idea of why we have this conversation. If we had a larger group, obviously we'd see a larger representation of these statistics, but this kind of helps us just know why we have this conversation, why it's a big deal. So raise your hand if you know of someone who has made a suicide attempt. Raise your hand if you've heard of someone who has died by suicide. It doesn't have to be someone you know personally, but so you've heard of someone. Okay. Raise your hand if you know someone personally who's made a suicide attempt. Okay, yeah. So, we're all here because we've all been impacted by this, and it impacts every community. It impacts no matter how rural, how urban, socioeconomic status, suicide impacts everybody. I want to talk briefly here about the language surrounding suicide. Whoops. Yeah, there we go. This is the passage that the Lord really just laid on my heart as I was praying and preparing for this. This is the verse that kept coming to mind. The thief's purpose is to steal, to kill, and destroy. My purpose is to give them a rich and satisfying life. And man, Satan wants to steal our hope, our joy, our peace, all those things that really are our prevention pieces. For suicide and for positive mental health. And God's purpose is to give us that rich and satisfying life and to minister into all those areas of brokenness and hurt. And so as we move through this, I hope that you leave with tools to feel empowered and being empowered through the Holy Spirit to say, with your help, Lord, help me to show people about what it means to have abundant life and satisfying life in you. I want to talk about the language surrounding suicide. So for many, many years, the term has been a person commits suicide. And we actually want to move away from this language because the idea of committing something is often very negative. What are some other things we say? Somebody committed crimes. committed, sometimes I have students say committed like adultery, committed grand theft auto, committed, and so there are all these very negative things, right? And so we want to move away from saying committed suicide because it has this very negative context, like the person is bad or they're some sort of evil person because they're struggling with this. Suicide is not the problem. It is the only perceived solution to the problem a person is going through. So suicide prevention is about showing that there is another solution. There is hope. People who are suicidal experience this tunnel vision. Anybody ever experienced tunnel vision? Yeah, so that like narrowing where the only solution becomes, well, I just got to end my life because there's no other way out of this problem. And so it's about helping that person see, no, there is hope, there is help, there are people who care about you and love you. So instead of the terms committed suicide, we want to say things like died by suicide, suicide attempt, suicide completion. Those are much more clinical and helpful ways to have that conversation. Suicide is a cause of death, so we want to talk about it as such. It just helps that conversation. So let's check our work here. No one can stop a suicide. It is inevitable. So this one is a myth. Sometimes people think, well, there's just nothing I can do to stop it, and that's just not the case. Now again, going back to that idea of not putting all the pressure on oneself to say, well, I have to be the only person who can step in and save this person. No, that's ultimately that decision that they make is their decision. And through prayer, through a team coming around them, those are the things that can maybe help. But suicide is not an inevitable thing. Confronting a person about suicide will only make them angry and increase the risk of suicide. That is actually a myth. If my pointer, it's trying to use the mouse right now. That's nice. There we go. Okay. We often think that, if I talk about suicide, then people it's going to put the idea in their head. And we just know from research that's not true. Will the person potentially be angry? Sometimes, but it's probably due to there's underlying anger for some other reasons. Asking someone directly about suicide does lower anxiety, opens up communication, and lowers the risk of an impulsive act because they recognize somebody actually sees me and they see what I'm going through, and I'm not alone in this. And I'll talk more about that in a few minutes. Only experts can prevent suicide. That is a myth. So even though a counselor or a therapist or a doctor may need to be part of the team treating this person who is dealing with a suicidal crisis, it is usually the friends, the family, the ministry workers, the people that are in that person's life day to day that can really recognize those signs and make the difference in this person's life. Suicide prevention is everybody's business, and anyone can help prevent the tragedy of suicide, and that is absolutely true. But just like with CPR, you have to train hundreds and thousands of people a lot of times just to save one life with CPR, and the same is true with suicide prevention. Most suicidal people keep their plans to themselves, and that's actually a myth. A lot of times there are signs. They might hint at it through little things. It might not be very overt, but there are always some sort of little signs. Most suicidal people do communicate their intent sometime, at least during the week preceding their attempt. And for some people that are struggling with these suicidal thoughts for months, for years, those things may be something that's coming up repeatedly. And that can be kind of hard because people are, I've heard that before, nothing's ever happened. But we have to take every threat seriously because we never know where that person's at. Those who talk about suicide don't do it. That is a myth. Most of the people who are mentioning suicide, thoughts of death, there should be some red flags there. People who talk about suicide may try or even complete an act of self-destruction. Once a person decides to complete suicide, there's nothing anyone can do to stop them, and that is absolutely a myth. Again, it's about breaking that tunnel vision. So if people can come around them, help them break out of that tunnel vision, that person's life could be saved. Suicide is actually the most preventable kind of death, and almost any positive action may save a life. It's actually the second leading cause of death among teens. Number 1's accidents. And number 2 is suicides. And it was number 3 like maybe a decade ago, and it's already moved up to number 2. So how can we help? Well, let's talk just briefly about the data. In the United States, overall, so all age groups, 8.3 million seriously consider suicide every year. That's a huge number, staggering number of people. And 2.2 million of those people actually make some sort of plan. They have some sort of idea of what they would do to attempt. 1.3 then of those, 2.2, attempt suicide. So that means there's one attempt every 24 seconds. So you think about the time we spend in this room, every 24 seconds, someone is attempting suicide. And then 44,965, and that number was from 2018. So you think about the number of suicides have increased because of the pandemic. And so those numbers are going to be much higher. We don't have all the data yet from 2020 and just the pandemic, but those are going to be staggering. Just based on surveys and things that are coming out, those results are going to be staggering. So one suicide every 11 to 12 minutes. And that's just insane to me. So among youth, let's talk about youth and let's talk about suicide community impact. So 6,211 young people died by suicide in the year 2018, and that was at a rate of 1 suicide every 2 hours, so just among 15 to 24-year-olds, so high school, college-age students. And for every suicide, no matter what age it is, 135 other people then are exposed to the impact of that person's death, whether it be people that they're close to in their school, in their sports teams, in their whatever communities they're a part of. 53 of those 135 will have some short-term disruptions to life. So people maybe that weren't super close to them, but it'll be traumatic enough that it'll cause them some trauma, at least for a short period of time. 25 of those people will have major life disruptions. And 11 of those people will have devastating effects in their life, things that trauma they will never completely get over. As the smaller the community, the bigger the ripple effect, because those are the average numbers, right? So that means some of those could be larger, some of them are smaller depending on the group. And there we go. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about suicide warning signs. This graphic actually came from the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. So it could be a variety of things. It could be things that they say. And sometimes people are super direct and they may say things like, I'm thinking of killing myself. Okay, well that's a pretty obvious threat, right? If someone says they're thinking of killing themselves, pretty concerning. But people don't always speak in those direct terms. People say things like, I just want to go to sleep and never wake up. That's actually a suicidal threat, but it's a more subtle one. And so we have to be attuned to, what do you mean by that? Why are you saying that? Is it because you've worked, 4 12-hour shifts back to back and you're just so exhausted you just want to sleep for a really long time? Or is it because there's something deeper going on? If they talk about feeling like a burden to other people, this is a huge one, especially in our older population and our senior citizens, where they feel like, well, I'm a burden to other people. And we don't think about suicides as much in our older population, but it is an issue because they feel like they're being a burden to their families, either financially or physically. But teens, middle-aged people across the board feeling like a burden to other people, or mentioning they feel like a burden, that would be a warning sign. If they mention they feel trapped or they have no reason to live, if they just talk like their pain is never going to end, they don't see a way out, they feel very stuck in that, whatever it is, things are never going to get better, things are never going to change, it's always going to be bad, those are very concerning red flags. Obviously, things like depression, anxiety have a huge tie-in to suicide attempts. Humiliation, we think about especially among teens. So bullying, I don't know how much training you maybe have had on cyberbullying and all that stuff, but that is a huge factor now among our teens because it is constant. They can't go home and be done with the bullying. It is constant. Every moment of every day, someone can access them and harass them. Or even games like Roadblocks or things where there's this open chat and then people are being either catfished or they're being tricked into giving people photographs of themselves, and then they're being blackmailed. And so there's all these pieces, and they think there's no way out. There's no other way out. So humiliation is a big piece, particularly among youth. If we see things like, rage within a person, those are obviously concerning things for a variety of reasons. If they suddenly lose interest in things that they used to really care about, so they stop showing up to things that used to be really important to them. It's like, what's going on? Are there other things going on in your life that are just, busyness, normal busyness, or is this just lack of ability to engage? Because depression makes it hard to get out of bed. It's hard to take a shower and function when you're feeling depressed. Behavioral things, withdrawing from activities. I mentioned that kind of with mood, that loss of interest. An increased use of alcohol or drugs, something to escape the pain that they're dealing with. With teens, that can be anything from vaping, which is very prevalent, to experimenting with other types of drugs, alcohol, marijuana, anything of the sort, any of those illegal substances as well. Pulling away, sometimes because of feeling a burden to other people or feeling like no one can help them. Sleeping too little or too much. With teens, you find that it typically is one of those extremes. Sometimes teens will be like, well, I only slept 3 hours, and they're sleeping less and less because their anxiety is keeping them awake, or their racing thoughts are keeping them awake. So it can be sleeping too little. I think we usually associate sleeping too much with depression and those sorts of things, but it can be also sleeping too little. Acting very recklessly because they don't care whether they live or die. So who cares if they, run a few red lights or driving recklessly or just doing things that are not safe in general. Calling people, saying goodbye, giving away stuff that was important to them. So they start giving away their gaming systems or, if they're an adult, maybe giving away things that are items that have been important to them. Maybe they, I got this for my wedding. Husband's dead or wife is dead. I'm just giving all my stuff away, anything that's painful, and then just trying to get rid of anything that was important to me. Searching online for means, so parents, knowing what your kids are searching for online. If they're looking up where to get pills or how to get a hold of a firearm. And that's another thing. If people have firearms in their homes, make sure they are locked up. I know of multiple situations where the person died by suicide using their parents' firearm. So, just keeping all those things in mind, we got to keep our kids safe, So let's talk a little bit about Kevin Hines. He's a great example of a person who didn't want to die, but felt that was his only way out. And anybody heard Kevin Hines' testimony, share a story? No? Okay. So he was actually in Fort Wayne 3 or 4 years ago, and it was such a privilege to hear him speak because he has such an incredible story. So he struggles with a variety of several different mental health issues, and he got to a point in his life where he thought, you know what, I don't see any other way out of my situation. I don't see any other way to deal with this pain. And so he decided, you know what, I'm going to jump off the Golden Gate Bridge. And so this is the year 2000, this month. And so he rode on a bus to the bridge. And he said that the whole time he was on the bus, he was crying and he was thinking, if just one person would say, hey man, are you okay? What's going on? I won't jump, because at least someone will have seen me and know that I'm struggling. And so he rides the bus all the way there. Nobody says anything to him. He's crying on the bus. The bus driver's like, dude, you got to get off. So he gets off the bus And he said he was standing at the side of the bridge, and this woman came up and just kind of tapped him on the shoulder, and he thought, oh, thank goodness, somebody's going to ask me how I'm doing. And this woman, he says he can remember her face, he remembers her sunglasses, he remembers exactly what she looked like. And she says, hey, could you take my picture? And so, he takes her picture, and then he jumps, and he said the second he did, he had instant regret. He wanted to take it back. And he said his strategy was to cry out to God and try to hit feet first. And he's one of the only people to survive, and I think the only person to survive who hasn't been paralyzed in some way. And that part of the story is pretty crazy. He talked about some animal that wasn't supposed to be there was there, and it caught his fall. I mean, it was crazy stuff. And so that the Lord was moving on his behalf, because he now goes and he shares his story and talks about, live one more day, choose life one more day, and tries to just minister to people. And he's lost a lot of friends and loved ones to suicide as well, which just increases the impact on his mental health. But his story is just so incredible as an example of all it takes is one person. All it takes is one person to have the eyes of Jesus and say, you know what? Something is wrong. I'm just going to say, are you okay? Just something that simple can be the difference between life and death. So this is specifically a video about teen suicide prevention, but it really applies to anybody. They're going to mention some things that you should say and some things that can actually be harmful. So listen for those things that are going to be helpful in a suicidal crisis and those things that are going to be harmful.
If she seems like a different person, say something.
Say, what's wrong? How can I help?
And ask straight out. Are you thinking about killing yourself? It doesn't hurt to ask. In fact, it helps.
When people are thinking about killing themselves, they want somebody to ask. They want somebody to care.
Maybe you're afraid you'll make it worse if you ask. Like, you'll put the idea in their head.
Believe me, it doesn't work that way.
It doesn't hurt to ask. In fact, the best way to keep a teenager from killing herself is to ask. Are you thinking about killing yourself?
And what if they say yes?
Or maybe.
Or sometimes,
Well, here's what you don't say.
that's crazy.
Don't be such a drama queen.
You're making too much of this.
That boy's not worth killing himself over. That's not going to solve anything.
You're just trying to get attention.
You're not going to kill yourself. What you do say is,
I'm sorry you're feeling so bad. How can I help? We'll get through this together.
Let's keep you safe.
All right, so let's talk about what are some of those things we heard that are helpful versus harmful. What do you guys think? That's crazy. Yeah, because it tells the person that you think they're crazy if you say that. So
treating it as authentic.
yes.
Yeah, I guess validating their feelings versus, the drama queen thing stood out to me because I think I recognize that and see that in
Yeah.
people, like, oh, that person, they just like to stir up drama or whatever.
Yeah. And I think that's a big one that I've seen with teens. Is a teen that's spent a lot of time with in the last year, and man, that's her family's response. And she has just struggled and struggled and struggled, and they're like, it's not real. She's just making this up. And she just continues to flounder because she doesn't have that support at home. And I mean, there's a lot of other issues at play there, but having, parents that say, that's not, you're not really at that up, suicidal. You're not this, that, or the other, and it's been very, very harmful to her. And so just recognizing that, what, if they're using this to get attention, there is something very deep that needs ministered to. So, let's say they were doing it for attention. There's something going on that is a deep brokenness that needs ministered to. So we want to just step away from the idea that, well, they're just doing this to be dramatic, they're just making this up, they're trying to manipulate me. If they are, there's something there that needs spoken into anyway. So asking the question, people often feel very uncomfortable just saying the word suicide. So sometimes it's just going to the mirror and practicing saying it to yourself, because it is an uncomfortable question for some people. And so a variety of ways you could go about asking it. Some people prefer to be less direct, starting off with like, have you been really unhappy lately? I've noticed you're not quite yourself. Have you been really unhappy lately? Have you been so unhappy that you want to go to sleep and never wake up? Do you think about, and kind of leading into it in a more gentler way. This may work well for you. I personally find that being more direct is more effective for me, for my personality, and for the interactions that I typically have. But it really depends on your relationship with that person and all of those things. So if you feel more comfortable with this less direct approach, that is one option. The more direct approach obviously would be things like, are you thinking about killing yourself? This one is from QPR. It kind of makes me laugh. I'm like, you look pretty miserable. What a terrible thing to say to someone. Right? It's like when people are like, you look really tired. And you're like, thanks. That's really helpful. Right? With so much eye cream, but I still look tired. Yeah. Touch base with people, directly or indirectly, checking on what they're how they're doing. If the more red flags there are for suicide, so the more, combinations of things like mood, pieces of conversation, behavioral things, the more of those pieces you see, the more risk there is. So just checking in with those people and asking the question. Don't be afraid of it, because it's not going to put the idea into their head. They're either already thinking about it or they're not. Just some little tips for asking the question. If you are not sure, you're like, well, they kind of seem like they could be more depressed than usual. They kind of seem like they might be, I don't know. Better to ask the question and them to be like, no, I'm not thinking about killing myself, than to not ask.
Better to have them ask you if you're crazy.
Right, absolutely. Then you can say, yeah, sure, I'm very crazy. But don't wait, because waiting sometimes ends up being filled with a lot of regret. If the person is reluctant to talk about it, to engage in that conversation, they seem to really want to kind of hem and haw and beat around the bush, so to speak, be persistent. And no, I really want to know. This one gal that I've been spending a lot of time with recently, she has a habit of, she wants to laugh things off. That's her coping mechanism. And so, you talk about something serious and she starts to like giggle and get distracted, and it's a coping thing. And so being persistent, and, I know this is a hard conversation, but I'm here. I want to be on your team. And I want you to feel like you're safe. If possible, get that person in a private setting. Obviously, being cautious about some of these other pieces of keeping ourselves safe and ourselves free from accusation, keeping ourselves above reproach, so to speak. But, if it's your friend, asking them in a very public place where they maybe feel like they can't have that conversation openly because they don't want people to overhear, so having it at your home rather than at a coffee shop sort of thing, those are the things that are going to be a little bit helpful in having an open conversation. Allow the person to talk freely. The temptation is going to want to be to cut in with advice, cut in with here's what you should do, but just listen. It's my mother's famous saying, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. You should listen twice as much as you talk. Just be a good listener. And being a good listener is one of the best tools we have to prevent suicide. Give yourself time. If you know that this person might be struggling, make some space in your schedule to have a conversation. Because if we're checking our watches and rushing out of there, the person doesn't feel seen and loved in the same way. Keep your resources handy. So I put on the tables a couple of different suicide prevention cards. I will leave all of these here plus my extras. They are free from SAMHSA. So keep them, distribute them to whomever might need them. They're similar. One of them is more focusing on coping and depression, and the other one is more focused on suicide, but both do include suicide, risks of suicide. So keeping your resources handy, refreshing your memory. The Suicide Prevention Lifeline is on there to call in case of emergency. So once we ask the question, so there's our cue. The P stands for persuade. So how do we persuade someone to stay alive? Well, first of all, we listen to the problem and give them our full attention. So putting away our devices, putting away our phones, silencing our phones, giving our full attention to this person, which is something we don't have a lot of in our culture, right? We're always distracted. There's always just things going on. So being fully present is an incredible gift to that person. And just keeping in mind, suicide is not the problem. It's the only perceived solution to the problem at hand. Don't rush into judgment. It's easy to say, well, I went through that. It wasn't a big deal to me. But for this person, that person's experience with it is very different. They have a different background than you. They have a different way of processing than you. And so it's easy to say, well, I've already been through this. It wasn't a big deal. Here's what you do. Well, the person then feels like their feelings are not valid, that they're maybe crazy for feeling the way that they do, and it makes them isolate and withdraw more. So we refrain from rushing into judgment and offer hope in any form. I'm here for you. We'll get through this together. You heard some of those statements in the video. We'll get through this together. I'm sorry that you're feeling this way. I'm sorry that you're struggling with this. I know how hard this must be for you. Or I can't imagine what you must be feeling. And then from there, asking that person to get help with you. So, will you come with me to go get some extra help? Like if the person says, yes, I have thoughts of suicide, and then checking to see, do they have a plan? And if the person says, yeah, I know, or they say something like, I know where my dad's gun is. Or my mom has a bottle of pills in their cupboard. You hear those sorts of things, warning bells should be going off in our minds. This person has a method and a means to attempt. So will you go with me to get help? Will you let me get you help? Depends on obviously the age of the person. If you're talking to like a teen or a child in your ministry setting, you can't necessarily sign all the waivers to sign them up, so you have to get parents involved and all those things. A lot of times to like check them in, get them counseling, those sorts of things. But will you let me help you get help? If it's a friend, another adult you're speaking with, and that threat is immediate, if you can get them in the car and drive them somewhere to get help right then, that is the ideal situation. But that's not usually how things play out. So the kind of third tier, least desirable of the three options, but still an option, if the threat doesn't seem absolutely immediate, saying, will you promise me not to kill yourself until we found some help? Obviously that promise may or may not hold a lot of water to that person, but if you think that the threat is not immediate and that person will remain safe for a day or two while you're helping arrange, a therapy session or a counseling session or inpatient care, that is an option. Questions thus far? I don't care about the baby noise.
You mentioned cutting as a that's a gateway to self-harm, or they've broken through that gateway to self-harm. That problem to me seems almost so ubiquitous among teens that when you say it, when you phrase it that way as they've already broken through this barrier and so now they're suicide risk, like that really stands out to me as because it's so prevalent, it's almost like, this kid's cutting, join, in my head I'm like, yep, join the club. That's another one. I got 50 of these now. I don't know. You'll outgrow it, I hope. And I would never say that. Right. I'm like, I don't really know how to. So from a suicide prevention standpoint, what insights would you have as far as, addressing those situations as they come up?
Yeah, so if a person is self-harming, so let me back up. So we have those, right, those things that, natural instincts to keep ourselves safe, right? So I'm not gonna go hit myself with a hammer on the hand because that would hurt, and I don't want my hand to be broken. I have some self-preservation things going on. But when a person is in so much pain, the cutting often is that I am trying to deal with the inside pain by causing outside pain because it's a distraction from the inside pain. And maybe they feel like I deserve this kind of harm because I'm worthless, or people don't, care about me, or they're being abused, or so oftentimes it's just that outward manifestation of that inward pain. But again, yes, it is a precursor to being able to cut the wrists, to take a bottle of pills. Because if that barrier of, I don't want to cut myself on purpose because that hurts and I don't want that, is already been broken, the ability to jump from there to I'm going to choose to cut my wrists is not a big jump. So when things like cutting comes up, and I have found that students do typically a couple of things. Some of them cut very deeply, and it's going to leave scars. Others of them, like my little friend, scratches herself till she bleeds. So it's not going to scar as bad. It's going to be much more difficult to notice. And I imagine you've seen this too. So that self-harm is there, but they're trying to be more subtle about it. But again, they've still broken that barrier. So at that point, really, if we can involve more professional people, so contacting the school, counselor, getting maybe parents involved, if that is a helpful thing. It's not always, but getting maybe parents involved, engaging and bringing more people on board as a team to support this person and surround this person, and then having conversations about why do you feel the need to cut yourself, which I'm sure you already do, but just understanding why they feel the need to cause that harm to themselves, but then understanding that we should be checking in then more regularly. Does that help? Is that okay? All right, so then we talk about how do we refer. So once we've said, okay, will you come with me to get help? Or can I help you get help? Will you promise not to hurt yourself until we get help? From there, we're going to refer people to another team because we want to build that support system around them. So we have to remember that a lot of suicidal people are going to think, I'm not worth helping, or there's no one that can help me. So it's that combination of feeling either unworthy of help or feeling like it's impossible for anyone to truly help me. So you may really have to do things like make appointments for them, find the counselor for them, find the best place for them to go, find the best fit for them to go. You may have a case where the person is like, well, that counselor, I didn't like them, they weren't a good fit, and so they just stopped going. Okay, you may have to step in and say, okay, let's find you a different therapist, because not all therapists are good fits for every person, right? So we got to find that person that's really going to be a good fit for them, the care situation that's going to be a good fit for them. Some people need some 24-hour watch for a while. That just is the reality of it. And I will say that there are some 24-hour places that are better than others. So when you're referring, obviously insurance and all those things are a factor, but you also want to think about the person's needs. And I know sometimes as a church body, maybe having to step in and say, we'll help cover the cost of this financially so you can get better help. Every church is different in how they approach that, but I know I've seen cases where people are like, well, this is the only thing my insurance will pay for, and it's just really not good help, and it ends up causing more harm than good, and so, but they're not willing to pay the money for a better situation, and so to be able to step in and say, you know what, let's help you get the help you need, can make a big difference. But the best referral obviously involves get that person with you, take them where they need to go, whether it's driving them to their counseling appointments or having someone else that you know they're going to drive them to their appointments, having someone that's kind of helping them be accountable to getting that help. The next best referral is getting them to make a commitment and then make arrangements for them. And then if you can't do either of those things, or that's just not an option for that situation, get a commitment in good faith, and then keep checking in. Did you make an appointment? Did you call anybody? Did you, find somebody who's a good fit for you? QR code if you want to scan it. But that is the Suicide Prevention Lifeline. There's a lot of good information and resources on their page. If you ever want more of these, I was actually disappointed because I requested Spanish ones, but they didn't send me any. But these suicide prevention cards are a great tool to just have available for people, so people can know the signs, have the number to call. If you're in a emergency situation where it's like, we can't go get help right now, there's no person around I could go to, maybe it's late at night and I don't know what to do or where to go, calling this lifeline. Those people are there to help talk people through suicidal crisis. More locally, we have Remedy Live, which is a great resource for teens, and they will sit and talk with students online about anything. I mean, pretty much any issue, you name it, they will talk about it, whether it's anxiety, depression, suicidality, pornography use. And they will address all of those things with students. So Remedy Live, and I do not have a resource of theirs, and I should have put it in the PowerPoint, but they are a great resource for youth, and they do online chats, and so they're a pretty cool resource we have locally. SAMHSA is where I got all of these cards, and they typically, I think, send packs of like 10, 25, maybe 25, but if you just explain why you need more, they'll give you as many as you want. I've ordered 500 before, so if you want more of those resources, those are available through SAMHSA. Just reminding ourselves of this, that the thief's purpose is to steal, to kill, and to destroy. And I think when we think about this verse in terms of suicide prevention, to kill, that the enemy wants to, God is the author of life, and Satan will do anything he can to work against that. And so as we, surrender ourselves to the Lord and trust the Lord and ask the Lord for his grace and his compassion in his eyes, Lord, help me to show people what it means to have hope, and show me how to offer that hope to other people, and what it means to live with abundant life. Not that we're always walking around with a cheesy grin on our face, because that's just not the reality. We all walk through stuff, but that we are emulating the joy of the Lord and the peace that comes with a close relationship with him.